Residents in dementia units are not affected by the anger of someone wanting to get out and banging at the door, although there's a lot of noise involved, but they're not physically affected by it. They're not affected by the anger of the resident being disturbed and distressed and aggressive when they're having showers or cares in the morning. Of course, that's the nursing staff being involved in that, affected by that, but they are affected, and quite often to a major degree, by unprovoked anger, and often intentional anger by other dementia residents. And this is a real problem. And dementia residents often have to devise their own ways of being able to be safe and protect themselves from these dementia residents who lash out unprovoked in dementia facilities, often because they're not getting their own way, or they want something that someone else has got. So it needs to be addressed in a systematic way so that people can be protected in dementia facilities. So one example that I would like to give that was actually a really ongoing problem with one dementia resident who was very aggressive. Now, it was intentional and it was unprovoked because it was a daily occurrence. Excuse me. It wasn't just a one-off. If it's a one-off, then you can put it down to a dementia episode. If it's showering, it only happens when the person's being showered, then it's because they're getting showered. But if it's happening every day over a particular incident, then, it's intentional anger. So in this example I'd like to give, there was this woman who was, she could be charming. Actually, that was the problem. She could be totally charming, which she was to the doctor, especially eyelash fluttering, and, she was effusive, and he couldn't see that there was any problem with her because she could just turn like that, and pleasant to some staff, but not to others. She wasn't pleasant to me. But to residents, she was appalling. So what she'd do was she insisted on having the main window seat in the sun, the prize window seat, each morning after breakfast. She insisted that she get this particular window seat and that no one else should sit there. That was the first problem. Second problem was not just that seat, but she insisted that the seat next to her, because it was an alcove of 2 seats, the seat next to her, no one sit in that either. Now, this is a major problem because there were only 8 seats for 30 people, 8 sunny seats that everyone wanted to sit in, and she was taking up 2 of them. And so, unbeknown, residents would just go up and try to sit there, and she would just lash out at them, punch them, basically, like really hard. It was terrible, and people would fall, which is really dangerous. And there were injuries. And this went on, for far too long, because the doctor didn't recognise it was a problem because she could turn and change her personality when he came in. So she had quite a lot of awareness. But how the residents actually coped with it is that there was one resident, she'd been a sportswoman in her day, very good at netball and basketball, and big, strong shoulders. That's probably where she had got the big strong shoulders from, and she still had them. And she'd had 4 sons, so she was used to being assertive with her sons, and she still had a good strong voice. And she'd go up to this woman when she was being aggressive to a more vulnerable resident, and she'd say, "Stop that, you mustn't do that, quit it, staff, do something." And she'd really yell out, and she was really assertive with this woman, and the woman would back down, because she'd go right up to her. No fear. She didn't have any fear that she was going to get hit. We all did, but she didn't. She'd go right up close. "You've got to stop that. You mustn't do that." She was so assertive, and she was the only resident, and actually the only person, including staff, in the unit that could do this, and this woman would back down. So that gave some protection to the residents, and this woman was so generous, really. I mean, she used to get really frustrated that she was having to do this all day. And she'd ask the staff to do something, and they would when they were in the lounge. But of course they were often up in the corridors doing the dressings or showering or cares. And so they weren't in, they're not in the lounge generally except for morning tea, afternoon tea and lunch, and medication rounds for the charge nurse. And she's often up the corridor doing dressings and other tasks. So often in the lounge, the residents are, not often, I shouldn't say often, but sometimes the residents are left in the lounge without anyone there. I mean, someone is actually meant to be there, but it's not always the case when there's emergencies and other things going on. So at that time, this resident would let loose, and it was only because there was this other strong resident who stood up to her. Otherwise, another safety net is to have a good friend that you're sitting by in the facility. That is a great help, because they'll shout out for you, they'll swing a handbag, swing a walking stick or whoever at the aggressor and shout out really loudly. And then if it, the staff will come if you shout out, but it may just take a bit of time, and then they're not going to be there permanently. So that's why when things erupt, it's good to have either a friend nearby or another woman or resident, as in this case, who's prepared to stand up to the aggressor. Anyway, in this instance, it would have been really helpful if the witnessing relatives, there were relatives that witnessed this, if the witnessing relatives of other residents had actually written in to the clinical manager, that would have been the best approach, because complaints or reports will go through to the doctor's meeting, and then it will be addressed from that point as to whether the person is sent on to another form of care or medication is implemented, because something needs to happen. I mean, there's no security guards, there's no restraints, there's none of that happening at a dementia unit. And unless relatives speaking up really is the voice for the residents. Often though, relatives think, I mustn't say anything, it's just dementia. That everyone says it's just dementia, but sometimes it's intentional aggression. And when it is intentional aggression on a repeated basis, same behaviour every day, not wanting someone else to sit by you in the sunny seat is not confusion, that's clarity. That you want the sunny seat on your own, sitting there, hogging the lot. So if it's a situation like that, it really does need to be addressed, and relatives need to have a bigger voice. So it needs to be discerned what the cause of the anger is, and clarity in terms of the solution. So I've written these two books, The Resident's Voice and The Resident's Rise, both from a dementia unit, and they can be got from Amazon or in my website, www.pietavalentine.com, in the description below. So thank you for your likes and looks and comments. I appreciate that, and please pass on the links to others. Thank you.